We will now move into our next panel, which focuses on new business models for cultural and heritage management. This diverse panel brings together the renowned researchers, educators, and consultants from Bocconi University, Italy. Please welcome a very, very friendly lady and Professor and Director of the Masters in Tourism and Economics, and your panel chair for this morning, Marta Antonioli. In addition to her role as Bocconi University professor, she's also a visiting professor in many universities abroad and directs the research of the United Nations World Tourism Organization, the EU, the Italian National Research Council, and Italian ministries. She's a member of various European and national science committees on tourism. She was the special advisor for the EU Commissioner for Tourism 2010 to 2014, and the president of the Task Force on Tourism of the Alpine Convention in 2013-2014. She's also the author of various publications on tourism, industrial and environmental economic policies. Ladies and gentlemen, very friendly lady, Professor Marta Antonioli.
Thank you. Can I introduce? So, good morning to everybody. I'm very pleased and honored to be here. I start to call on to the panel the different people. It's very difficult for me to read here. So let's start from Patrizia Asproni, Director of Patrimonio Culturale Gruppo Giunti, who is a very famous Italian editor on culture and other cultural heritage, President of ConfCultura, a national association of companies involved in enhancement and promotion of cultural heritage, cultural tourism, and technological innovation. So we are dealing with someone from very practical point of view. She's president of the Fondazione Industria and Cultura as well, which provides a meeting place where companies may learn to use culture as a driver for economic and social development. Chairman of the IPOC2 European Platform on Cultural Heritage, and recently appointed as President of Fondazione Musei Torino, Piemonte, Piedmont. So we are working with something very practical. Thank you, Patrizia, for being here. Lorne Sheehan, I'm sorry for the pronunciation of all the panelists, which should be quite wrong, Professor and Associate Director of the Rowe School of Business, Dalhousie University, Canada. Research is related to tourist destination management and stakeholder management, so we are dealing with more tourism at the destination level, and in the previous case we are speaking about more a bit related to cultural heritage. His work has been focuses on the role of destination management organizations in creating and sustaining competitive and sustainable tourist destinations, and his interest in the relationship between tourism, entrepreneurship, sustainable prosperities of communities. So we are dealing with the very complicated and transversal horizontal way of tourism and other social science. Thank you very much, Lorne, to be here, to have joined us. Well, here the surname is much more difficult for me. Doris van der Meene Ruschmann, who is president of, she's a consultant, president of the Ruschmann Tourist Consultants, Brazil. She has a PhD, a doctorate in tourism from the University of Sao Paulo, and implemented the master's degree in tourism and hospitality at University of Valle do Itajaí. She has implemented and coordinated an e-learning course in tourism in Brasilia and published 8 books and collections, as well as book chapters and articles in technical and scientific journals in Brazil and abroad. So we have both a consultant and a researcher. So is what Jafar asked us to do, academia and a practical and operational approach. And also she has engaged with national and international, she had a national and international experience. She develops consulting work to the Ministry of Tourism and Environment in Brazil and also in Portugal, Mozambique and the Cape Verde Islands. So we are also related to the other stakeholders, the public sector. Thank you very much, Doris, to be here with us. And last but not least, Yang-Cheng Wang, Professor and Associate Dean, Rosen College of Hospitality Management, University of Central Florida, USA. Expertise includes destination marketing and management, information system management, technology and e-commerce strategy, and research methods in hospitality and tourism. All our panelists are very involved in ICT, and then we will use them for that as well. Award-winning researcher, author of 3 books and plus the 100 scientific publications, co-editor of the Journal of Destination Marketing and Management, and on the editorial boards of 9 international academic journals. Consultant on destination marketing and development, technology, e-commerce strategies for hospitalities and tourism organization, collaborative strategies for regional destination marketing and management, and experiential marketing. So we have really many and a lot of stuff to discuss and to... Now, few words just to start on what we would like to underline. Well, first of all, let me tell you that I'm very pleased and honored to be here, not just for the topic, because we're speaking about heritage management, but to be here in this place, which is very relevant and we can breathe culture and heritage. So the role of cultural heritage, I would like to say a few words on that. For tourism is very relevant, and also the link among various issues, culture, creativity, and economic practice. Actually, many of us, we are involved in, we will speak about money, fundraising, and we will speak about through an economic approach. Well, what is cultural tourism? Well, in this moment we are demand, because we are doing cultural tourism as well, but is a special interest kind of tourism, where culture can form the basis of what? Of attracting tourists, of motivating people to travel. Yesterday, but also many cases, we hear that is a very relevant major source of tourism, the culture, for the growth of tourism in the last decades. But also, we should think about safeguarding the heritage to protect it. So from a business perspective, we must involve the marketing, the development of the sites, of the attraction. But also, we should look at, and that will be another of our basic tasks here, also we should look from a motivational perspective where visitors travel are they are a kind of results of interest in cultural activities. That means that we should look and we must pay attention to management. So within our new business models, we never have to forget them. So we started from preserving the cultural heritage. We are moving through management, but also tourism. Cultural tourism is an experiential activity where engagement with culture can be unique and intense, and tourists should be also educated as well as entertained. I didn't, the time was very late, I didn't want to upset Matilda with an intervention at the previous panel, but actually I thought, and I say a few words now, that also tourists can be educated. We spoke a lot about the code and so on, but I think that we should do something also on that side. Now, which are the recent trends in global cultural tourism? Well, I should add to what we already said something on the role of governance. We should speak a bit about urban planning. We should speak not just about tangible assets, but new attempts to compete through development of new cultural heritage, not just museum, culture district, festivals, music. Yesterday we spoke about music. In the panel there was an intervention on music, a research was presented on that. But also the need for differentiation, the cultural supply. Our tourists are much more motivated on authenticity. They are demanding, they're searching for identities. So we try to think about all the intangible cultural resources everyday life, creative activities, local food, arts, crafts. So we are moving from tangible to intangible, so from fixed assets to movable assets, from passive contemplation to active experience, co-creation. So among the models, we shouldn't forget about communication, and ICT will be a very good tool in order to do that. But I should also add a reference to industrial archaeology or industrial heritage, because all those represent our asset, cultural heritage assets. So human and financial, and I'm going to finish, human and financial approaches are required. Digital and knowledge economy play a relevant role. Fire stole us in many different ways that approach. So, in any case, we don't have to forget, and I repeat this issue, that tourism and culture is a place-specific. So they do not exist from the point of view of the policy and of the governance without a destination. And destination, the most of the time, are uniqueness, identity, price, so they're moving in such a direction. So we must think in terms of planning and management, but money matters. I'm sorry, like an economist, to go back to money after science, after cultural heritage, after history, after much more social science. We have a decreasing in the public budgets. We have to reconvert spaces sometimes. We need money for preservation. We already spoke about that, destination management. But also, we shouldn't forget, and I'm asking the panelists to concentrate also a bit on those issues, to start up new ideas, mainly from young people, women, in less developed areas. So that can be very interesting. So please give us example in your presentation of join-up management, sometimes on small dimension scale of cultural organization, and also to how to involve ICT, of course, philanthropy and shared economy, mainly for crowdfunding. I would like to stop at the end, so I put everything on the table on those issues. Maybe that Jafar has to introduce in his definition, in his list, also something related to philanthropists, which can assume a very important role in time of low of budget constraints. That's all. I'm sorry to have subtracted more time. I don't know the order in which we can start, but I start from my left immediately. Patrizia, please, your experience.
Thank you, Magda. Thank you, everybody. I thank you, all of you, for inviting me. It's interesting forum, really interesting for us. Few words on ConfCultura, which I'm president of. ConfCultura represents all the private companies that in Italy run museums, archaeological sites, and business on cultural heritage. Just few numbers. In Italy, we have 4,500 museums, 2,000 archaeological sites, 10,000 castles and historical houses. So we have a huge cultural heritage, and it's an important legacy for us, and it's an important tool for business. That's what we think. Just a few months ago, here, Naples hosted the informal meeting of the EU Minister of Culture and Tourism. And I think this city is perfect to talk about tourism. Naples is the Italian mix of traditions and culture, where the key words are European, Latin, and Mediterranean all together. Europe, and Italy within it, is still the most top-rated destination in international cultural tourism. Therefore, the scenario has changed. And now we have to face new styles, as Magda says before, of tourism, more focused on personal experience. The demand for tourism services implies a more complex supply, composed by several elements: heritage, landscape, tradition, food, wine, lifestyle, the one recognized as the Italian way of life. On the supply side, cultural tourism is already generating new opportunities, linking with the local small and medium enterprises like design, fashion, food, and wine. Again, to give an insight within the scenario, in Italy, the environmental tourism has increased its revenue of 21% just in the last year. Actually, we say we are surrounded by a beauty-based economy, which has great development potential. To support all this, we need some fundamental political addresses. First of all, a mid-long-term vision fitting the cultural heritage-wide concept in an industry-driven model, not only in economistic terms, but as a production process. That means efficient use of money, a maximization of the cultural project and activities' effectiveness, especially referred to their own capacity to generate leverage effects on territories, and financial sustainability of the projects. The starting point is the development of territory-based integrated projects and the connection among tourism and other sectors, economic and social, at local and national level. Not only an one-product economy, but a complex process in which companies are first players. We think that running of cultural heritage has to move towards a private management model, but we have to remind that responsibility and property of cultural heritage belong to the public administration as an expression of local communities who are identified by their culture. Moreover, while during the past we were more focused on the cultural heritage protection, keeping it apart from the community's daily life, now instead we have to promote a deep integration of these elements, aiming at social innovation, employment creation, participation processes, and audience development, involving citizens themselves and not only tourists. Within this context, two aspects need to be highlighted. On one hand, use of technology as an infrastructure to design tailor-made services, as a software required to make the hardware as heritage, landscape, and everything to work properly. On the other hand, Italy has to face a fundamental challenge, the creation of a Latin and Euro-Mediterranean brand, which has to compete with the Asian and American ones, as well as support the intercultural dialogue, especially in this particular phase we are living now. To realize this, we need creativity, management, and optimization of the overall resources, using a tailor-made Italian and European model which emphasize diversity as an added value of our culture and traditions, more than a passepartout and mass-oriented model. Thus, we need to work on emotional factors which are competitive edge for Italy, acknowledging that our gross domestic product should be determined by our cultural domestic products, on which we need to re-establish our own leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrizia. Let's go in the alphabetic order. And sorry, I didn't say before, I'm a very bad panel chair, to be in 6 minutes in the first round so that we can add some other from the floor, people asking. So, Professor Sheehan, professor of Dalhousie University in Canada.
Okay. Thank you, Magda, and it's a pleasure for me to be here. I should clarify first, I'm not the first choice for this position on the panel. The first choice is Antonio Minguzzi, my colleague, but I'll tell a little story about that in my presentation. But he could not be here today because of a new job he has, which is very relevant to this topic. So if you look at the title of this presentation or this panel session, there's two main parts to it. New business models. New business models, a business model from a strategy perspective means we're trying to make a profit. We try to earn money from this activity. That's the idea of a business model. Second part of the title of the session is cultural heritage management. And as was just described, it's broad, it's tangible assets, it's intangible assets, and many of them are what we would call public assets or in fact public goods in economics terms. So this really implies marrying a business model with the use of public goods is some kind of P3. And this is not new to us in tourism. Of course, we are in the world of P3s. When I teach my students, one of the first things I say is this tourism phenomenon is a perfect example of a public-private partnership, or a P3. So that's not new, but what is new, possibly, is the way we can conceive of and configure P3 for the purposes of cultural heritage management. So what are the opportunities that we could look at? What are the breadth of the relationships within the model of the P3? What are the depth of those relationships? Could they be broader? Could they be deeper? And then what new models might we look at, might be willing to consider? My initial thoughts when I started looking at this topic is we have way more cultural assets than we can manage. And we just heard how many there are in Italy. Italy is probably the best example in the world of this. You cannot dig a hole in any city in Italy almost without running into some artifacts, some culturally significant artifacts. So the problem is, how can we manage and interpret or make these available, access to these assets in a proper way? So I don't believe that the public sector, which is getting cut back around the world in terms of the money that they have, I don't believe that they can really properly interpret all of these cultural assets. I'm not even sure that in all cases we can even protect them, let alone interpret them. So this really, to me, sets the stage for why we need to have some new business models to protect these assets. So let me now talk about two specific examples. And the first one directly relates to why Tonino Minguzzi is not here. So in your conference package, you have this book. And this book, little black book, is the historical archive of the Banco di Napoli. So the Banco di Napoli has a complete archive from 1574, 440 years, over 1 billion transactions. It is the entire economic history of the Kingdom of Napoli. And you can argue, because of the importance of Napoli, it is almost an archive of the entire history of Europe here, economic archive. But it's not only economic, it is also cultural. Because if you look in these records, and I had the opportunity to look in these records yesterday with Tonino, if you look in these records, there are things like Michelangelo Carpaccio receiving a payment of 200 ducat as a deposit on a painting. I mean, this is how culturally significant this archive is. It's amazing. It is the biggest one in the world. It is the biggest archive in the world. And it is here in Napoli, and it is not open to anybody to see. It's not open to the public, right? Correct. I'm correct? And so this is a perfect example of what can we do now with this incredible cultural asset that reflects our history and our culture. So the asset now, if you want to call this a cultural asset, the historical archive of the Banco di Napoli, is in the control of this new organization, which is the foundation Antonio Minguzzi is the manager now of this foundation, and so he is starting to explore the possibility of how to protect it, how to interpret it, and how to potentially earn money from this asset. The foundation has 3 mandates. In addition to protecting the asset and managing this, the archive, the foundation also is charged with 3 mandates: cultural assistance to the community of Napoli, research, and helping the poor. So these are all what we could call corporate social responsibility type responsibilities. So any money that could be made by protecting this archive that is in excess of the cost of protecting this archive could then be used to fulfill these other very socially desirable mandates. So the question is, I think that this example leads us to, is are we prepared to let the private sector in some way be involved in the interpretation of this archive? Are we prepared to let them earn a profit partially, and part of the profit we can share with the foundation to help fulfill these 3 mandates? And what kind of policy framework do we need to create to enable this? So very quickly, one other example, and a very different example, and perhaps the only reason why I should even be here. And this example is a research interest of mine in an Italian concept called albergo diffuso. How many people recognize the term albergo diffuso? A few. How many people who are not Italian recognize the term albergo diffuso? Okay, a few, a small number. So albergo diffuso, the English word is distributed hotel. It was started, the term is coined by an Italian academic, Dalhousie, in the mid-1980s, who saw hilltop towns in Italy being depopulated, declining, and saw an opportunity to sort of reinvest in the development of a hotel, but conserving the local architecture and buildings. So this concept preserves local historical architecture. It is from the grassroots up, which means it's done by local people, so it benefits local people. It creates memorable, authentic cultural relationships that benefit the entire community, and so it is also sustainable. So I think I've used my time, but I just wanted to introduce that as another very different model. It's a private sector-based model, and these are not public assets in a way. These are individually owned properties within old towns, but this type of activity, if it becomes more pervasive, can help protect these old towns in terms of the cultural authenticity and the interest to tourists. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think, Lorna, that both your examples are very relevant for us because private bank foundations are very rich and they're able to catalyze resources in order to develop the heritage, but also the idea of the local planning for small and small size entities can be very relevant. Thank you very much. Now, Doris, please, your experience. We moved to Brazil, we changed the continent again.
It's me? Yes. Yeah. Yes. Let's see. Well, good morning. It's impossible for me. I was born in Brazil, and see Naples, see Italy, see all Europe, the enormous heritage, cultural heritage, material and immaterial. And to compare this with Brazil, it's impossible. It's impossible. There are no comparison. And as I said before, we are a very young country, 500 years. And when we look here, how many centuries goes here. And as we commemorate our 500 years of this founding, Brazil was founding just with America, North America. And we have from this time different kinds of cultural heritage. And I concentrate here in my paper with material heritage. And in Brazil, we have very economical cycles. And it begins with Brazil wood cycles when the Portuguese comes and hold our wood. It was Brazil, that's why the name Brazil, Brazil wood. And after this comes the sugarcane cycle, then comes the coffee cycle, the industrial cycle, and nowadays the service cycle. And all of them left memories, left heritage. And someone big, someone not so big. And we have to understand in Brazil, we have a multicultural, a situation of multicultural, and the integration of these cultures. We began with our Indians, and then we have the Portuguese, later the people from Africa as slaves, and in the beginning of the last century, we have the immigration of Germans, of Italians, and later from Japanese people. But Brazil has all the world is represented in Brazil. And many times this reflected on the material heritage. And we have a politic in Brazil it's the so-called lei Rouanet law, but when the industries and the service and the big commercial, they can pass a part of the taxes to the culture, material and immaterial. But we have just after the 1980, the first recognizing of the UNESCO Brazilian material cultural heritage. We have the historic city of Ouro Preto, the historic center of Olinda, the Jesuit Guarani ruins of San Miguel Mission, where in the south, the historic center of Salvador, the sanctuary of Bom Jesus de Matosinhos, and a modern or contemporaneous architecture of Brasilia, and it is recognized from the UNESCO too. The Serra de Capivara, this is the ancient people for 40 centuries. They were in there and they are the heritage. And then we have the historical center of São Luís, the historical center of Diamantina, and recently the historical town center of Goiás. So contemporary architecture we can say from Brasilia. The buildings are from Oscar Niemeyer, very known, and today we live a cycle, different and little bit turbulent political cycle in Brazil, but I fixed my answers here to the questions given in the program. Isn't it, Magda? Yes, no? And the scenarios, what looks forward, what is coming, not only in Brazil, but all the world, we heard here, all the historical of only from Naples and Italy and anymore. So, oh God, 1 minute. How this demographic we have now, consumer behavior in general, and hence also travel behavior, is influenced by the consumer age. And we can see, yesterday we heard about the senior tourism. And senior tourism not necessarily want to go to churches, museums, or other things. They want to see the city, they want to see the nature, and they want to see other things. But a very great example of a cultural heritage is this place in which we are. The reconstruction, the bombing, 5 days burning, and this is really incredible what happens in this. And then which age? I have seen many young people on the streets around here in Naples, but not in the church, not here in this place. Always people of 40, 50 years. Now, there will be drastic changes in the age structure and the population in different countries within the next few decades, and holiday travel also. And in these scenarios, how will these demographic changes influence travel behavior? Cultural trips, old or new, but we have to consider dance, music, arts, ancient and modern. And sharing economy, firms are increasingly penetrated the travel industry by offering consumers far more individual choice. Traditional suppliers are disrupting the establishment business. Classical is in new services, renewed material, and how it situates the heritage in these conditions. And we have another scenario, traditional travel suppliers. I have to stop. I didn't understand. Over?
Your 1 minute already went to 3.
My time is over?
She can take my time.
No, I'm sorry.
Just few seconds
I'm sorry.
left.
Yeah, maybe just 1 minute.
Finish
and
your
finish.
sentence.
1
Yeah,
minute.
rapidly to finish. And now is the thinking and the writing and the searching about to adapt the cultural heritage. Travel brands would have been in the perfect position, but they did not do it. They want to sell more, always more of the same. And then I come rapidly to all the constraints to work with the cultural heritage. Firstly, of the operators, of the tourism operators. Small thinking so that we have no changes. International crisis, worldwide crisis. Local crisis, natural disasters. Lack of involvement of politicians in tourism destination. High cost of innovations, develop new destinations. Accommodation of the agents and aging of the operators. It's necessary to have new blood and new needs in the travel industry. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you for your meeting.
It's okay. I'm the one sorry because they cut to all of us our time. So thank you very much, Doris, in particular for having told us how to adapt cultural heritage also to new scenarios. And this model can be very interesting and very useful for us. Now, Yong Cheng, your
Thank you very much.
experience, please.
Can you hear me? Morning, everybody. I'm so glad to be here and enjoy Naples every minute. Okay, I think this is the right time and the right place to talk about culture and heritage tourism because Naples is one of the cities really based on heritage tourism. Even though I originally come from China, which is also very famous for culture and heritage tourism, but compared to Italy, I think every time I come back to Italy, I was really impressed and amazed by how many cultural and heritage products available in Rome, in Naples, and in some other cities in Italy. So I know that we have a time limit, but I just would like to raise certain observations of highlights, based on my understanding of culture and heritage tourism. I think there are several issues which are really, really important. And one of the first issues actually is mentioned by one of the panelists here. That is the balance between tangible and intangible aspects. Because a lot of times in a lot of destinations, what we tend to see is the focus on the tangible aspects of the heritage tourism instead of the intangible aspects of heritage tourism. So I think the balance is important because each aspect has a role. My understanding is that the tangible aspect a lot of times is the carrier for the intangible aspect of cultural and heritage tourism. Just give you one example. I was raised and growing up in China. And of course, China in the last 30 years has witnessed very, very fast economic development. And they reached a certain point where they have to diversify the economy, so to speak, because the manufacturing industry is not working anymore, which will not lead to the competitive advantage for the whole country. So one of the sectors they focus on right now, of course, is the service sector. And within that sector, tourism is one of the most important strategic areas for the new economic development. Against that background, there are a lot of tourism development projects in China. Some of them are really large-scale development projects, right? So in some of the cities, big cities and middle-scale cities, if you go and visit some of the cities over there, you will see the whole street, or sometimes the whole town, whole city, replicated after certain dynasties in the Chinese history. For example, the Tang Dynasty or Song Dynasty, some of the so-called glorious dynasties in Chinese history, right? So, but when you look at, for example, the content of those replications and constructions, you ask the question of the meaning of that, of doing that, okay? So what is the point of doing that? Does it have any meaning, for example, especially from a visitor's perspective? So a lot of times, I will doubt, whether that is the case. What you see is the physical construction of the so-called replicas, right? But what is the meaning attached to that, okay? And, what is the value created for the tourists? It's very, very limited. So I think, that balance aspect between tangible and intangible aspects of heritage tourism is very important. Now, since, heritage tourism, cultural tourism, a lot of times we have to deal with the public domain, the other panelists just mentioned. So, a lot of times, the public sector will come up with policies, rules, and regulations, right? And the private sector will be involved in the operation and the business aspect of the operations. So, a lot of times, I think the PPP model, the public and private, partnership model, usually is the key to the success of cultural and heritage tourism development projects, because this is different from any other typical tourism industry sectors. When you deal with culture, when you deal with heritage, a lot of times it is controlled by both the public and private sectors. So I think that is a very, very important component if we want to make sure that it is a great success. Now. Since it is a public domain, public good, social inclusion is also very, very important. So that involves, for example, decision-making, which we talked about a little bit earlier this morning, who makes the decisions and how the decisions were made, okay? So based on experiences I had both in China and also USA, so all the decisions in China, we know that. Who made those decisions? Government officials made those decisions, right? Especially for the tourism projects, large-scale tourism projects, whether it is cultural related, whether it's heritage related, or whether it is other sectors of other forms of tourism projects. No local citizens usually are involved in the decision making. So it is just basically the government officials, usually number one, number two, person in the city or in a town, okay, whatever they want to do, and then they will make that decision. So that was the case for several projects I was involved personally in the last 5 years, and that was a really amazing experience, eye-opening experience, okay? Because we designed a study following the so-called international norm or international standard, right? We came up with surveys and interview protocols for local citizens and so on and so forth to ask them about, their, experience or perception about the project. And then everybody we approached, the answer was, you don't have to ask us because we were not at all involved in the project, okay? So the government officials, basically make all the decisions. Whereas, for example, the country where I live right now, in the U.S., is to the opposite side. So every decision has to involve the public. Okay, just give you one extreme example. This is not related to cultural product or heritage project, right? In the past few years, we have been talking about creating a railway system, light rail system, from the airport to the tourism area, right? And we have been talking about that for a little bit over 20 years, okay? So every time we get people involved, businesses, organizations, and citizens, and then there's no consensus. No consensus can be reached, okay? So we have been talking about for 20 years, no decision, right? So that is the other kind of extreme based on my experience. Because of the time, I have 1 minute. Last point I want to mention is really, here we're talking about business model, we're talking about funding model, right? So if you look at Italy, there are so many beautiful cultural and heritage, especially heritage sites, okay? The monuments, the buildings, and so on and so forth, right? This is not a criticism, of course, for me to sit here to say anything, negative about Italy. But I think, some of the, the conditions of some of the buildings, the monuments, of course, could be improved, right? But I think, one of the constraints is really related to the resources, right? So usually, we do not have resources to, keep up with the conditions of all those buildings, right? So what is the best model? I'm not sure whether there is a best model, but just look at this beautiful historical complex, all right? And it is open to the public, okay, to the tourists, right? But it is also open to public events like this, okay? For example, gala dinner last night was fantastic. Fantastic. I hope that everybody enjoyed. I believe everybody enjoyed that, right? But I don't believe it is free, is right? And maybe it is free for a conference, but I don't believe it is free, okay? So this is one of the ways probably we should, think about more. And we should think about more in terms of how to expand this type of model to other, locations or sites, to other destinations and to other, countries. Yes, you are making money, right? And if you have a good control about, for example, access and preservation, I think it is very much doable, right? So you make money out of that, out of these, what we call entrepreneurial activities, even though it is a religious site, right? But you can utilize the fund to update whatever you need to update, the physical structure of the building, the intangible aspect of the site, so and so forth. So I think, we need to look at different kind of, models because, each country, the rules, policies, regulations are different. As a result of that, what you can do also is different. You have certain constraints in certain countries where you are more flexible to do certain things or trying to do things completely differently in other countries. So I think, we have to kind of look at the situation and the environment and context because I don't believe that, a model of, one fit all model will not be working, obviously. So because of time, I just want to stop here for the time being, and hopefully we'll have a second round of questions, right? Thank you.
Yo Cheng, thank you very much. I think that has been very interesting, your point that in the current stage, everybody is involved, public, private, national, international. What I'm missing, but we do not have time and I don't want to add and to take time to other intervention, is for Italy, for example, since it has been mentioned, the role played by European Union, because we didn't work on that, and that could have been a real good point to put on the table. Anyhow, I just, before going to the floor, to ask a few kind of bullet, kind of very short view, since we spoke about experience economy. Yesterday we spoke a lot about social network, mobiles, cloud device, and so on. So we have also new models of real-time connection across people, and that can be reflecting also an approach for local culture. So, sharing economy, what do you think about sharing experience? Because we have destination ambassadors through posting Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Foursquare. Last night, everybody during the lunch, during the dinner, were moving. So, what do you think? If you want to add, if some of you like to add some point also on the sharing economy, on the new ICT approach on that?
Yes, I think eventually the determining factor for the success of any type of tourism products or projects should be based on experience. Because, number one, we need experience economy. Number two, the ultimate selling point for tourism industry in general is experience. But when you look at culture and heritage related products, okay? So what is the selling point? Only selling point, I would not say that, only selling point, but at least one of the most important selling point is experience. So experience is extremely, extremely important in dealing with cultural and heritage tourism. So how can we make sure that the consumers will have an experience? Well, this is a very big topic, right? I mean, you can write books, you can write, probably tons of articles based on this topic. But I think, one of the aspects the chair of the panel just mentioned is the utilization of ICT, information and communication technology. Because when you look at the experience from a consumers and visitors' perspective, right? And then, of course, you have to look at the needs of the consumers at different stages, including the pre-trip, stage, during the trip stage at the destination, whether you have the information available, right? And then, of course, after the trip, to help the visitors to relive the memory, to retell the story, and so on and so forth, right? So in terms of that, okay, if you think about the role of information and communication technology, and nowadays, of course, the newer platforms, social media, different types of social media, that can exactly help cultural and tourism products, to deliver those products to the consumers, not only while they are at the destination, but before, and even after they visit the site or they visit the destination. So I think, ICT will play a very, very important role in that process of creating the experience. Because, at the very end, from a consumer's perspective, again, what kind of experience is more valuable? It is not, for example, necessarily the passive way of absorbing information and knowing something new about the site, about the history, about the culture. It's more about the co-creation. Okay, so by utilizing the technology, you can provide a platform, or opportunity for consumers to get really engaged and be part of that consumption process, right? So I think that is a very important aspect.
Thank you. If someone would like just to say a sentence, please, because if not, you like to add something? No? Actually, I was expecting from seeking for partnership also something else, how to, I said at the beginning, but we don't have time, I just want to leave the point on the floor, how to get an opportunity also for crowdfunding, because transparency and participation of the ICT of the web can be useful for our financing to get internally and externally sharing information for money as well, if I go back a bit on that. So that can be interesting. Sorry, we don't have time, but we will have opportunities in the future. Please, from the floor. Yes. One, we start from here, then I go back to you.
Thank you very much. I wish this panel could last the whole morning. I find it really very interesting. So let me say something. Spain is well known for the beaches and sun, but it is the second country in Europe, while talking about heritage, after Italy, of course. So I have a comment and a question. I wanted to say that when we have such, or when there is such a big heritage, the best way of preserving it is to use it. So I agree with what has been said, that we have to find new business models to preserve our heritage. But I also wanted to say, talking about immaterial heritage, intangible heritage, cultural heritage, that we are very used to have visitors coming from our own culture. Because if you think about culture, America and Europe are very similar. So when nowadays we are looking for new markets, and we are thinking in Asia and mainly in China to attract tourists, we cannot show our heritage in the same way we have been doing until now, because they are not going to understand it. They don't share our own culture. So we certainly have to think in changing how we are doing things. And now the question. I have been very surprised because I haven't heard anything about guides. Interpretation. I mean, you have talked about the use of technology, but if we are talking about experiences, the best way of sharing an experience is talking with a real person. And Magda has just mentioned that we all depend on the European Union. And traditionally, we have had a kind of a fight inside the European Union because of the services of guides. So our countries wanted to have compulsory local guides to explain our culture and our heritage. But, the markets, the countries from the north of Europe were not interested in paying for this service. So I have I want just to mention that in Madrid, the region of Madrid has avoided the card for guides. So nobody can be declared guide nowadays. So this has been a big problem because anybody is explaining whatever they want, and we are hearing many nonsense. And just for you to know, Madrid, which is a quite new town, is surrounded by five World Heritage Sites declared by UNESCO, only half an hour or 1 hour from the city. So it is a cultural destination.
Thank you. I think that since it's very late, we collect all the questions and then we answer together, so we get...
Sorry for being so long.
Yeah, okay. There is over there.
Thank you. I agree with the statement earlier. I wish this panel could go all day. It was a very interesting topic. And Dr. Wang brought up some really interesting points. A quick comment and a question. What is the role of government and destination marketing organizations, tourism boards, relative to private industry? The title of the panel is New Business Models. So there, as was mentioned by the gentleman from Canada, it's about generating revenue. And this revenue can go to help preserve culture and heritage. How do they work together? What is the obligation that government has to maintain? And I also agree with Dr. Wang, in this beautiful city, you see the opportunity for preservation and improvement. And all over the world, everywhere I travel, I see it, certainly in the United States as well. Even though we have a much younger cultural heritage, it's sad sometimes to see the state of the condition of these sites. So there's an obligation on both sides for private industry to come together with government and work in that partnership. So I just posed that question because I think that's something that, this group, this distinguished panel, as well as the people here at this conference, these are topics that can be brought forward globally to be addressed, because I think a long-term strategy must happen in the world of tourism for tourism to be successful. And it's about individuals, it's about people and the connectivity of those people. So I just want to leave that, and hopefully there can be some further thought given to that and discussion, because it's a very, very important for our industry, for us to be successful in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I think we need to ask the panel to answer this question.
Just an introduction, then I will leave. Thank you very much for the cross-culture and also the guide point, which has been pointed out. I think that the guide are translators, are very relevant translators, not just from the language point of view, but in knowledge. And as far as we have cross experience, we need them. I mean, the academic, the archaeologist doesn't need maybe an explanation, but other people, and they should be reported to different levels. So that can be very relevant, and we didn't have time to touch it. So Mercedes, thank you very much on that. And for the last thing as well, I just want, and I leave to the other panelists the answer, but I just want to underline how Europe as the first destination in the world, still, even if the percentage are decreasing and so on, but the role played by government is quite new, let's say, because government is involved in protection in some areas, but from the point of view of the destination of culture, we have really, before going to new models, we really have to implement huge models like cultural itineraries and, I mean, the approach also on communication and so on. So we really have huge plans already done at the European level, so all the governments should report to that, just that for European countries. But sorry that I took, if you want to answer on...
And maybe just excellent point about the tour guides. A lot of tour companies are trying to minimize their cost structure, and there's a cost to having a local step-on guide. But that's creating a problem. It's creating a problem for authenticity of the interpretation of the culture that's being visited. And ultimately, I don't think it creates the best experience, therefore, for the visitor. So I think that's an extremely important point, that we need to have these local guides participate in tours. On the point of government control, it is the responsibility of government to ensure that these cultural assets are preserved for future generations. It's always going to be an issue of use versus preservation. In Canada, we have our national parks. This is why people come to Canada. We don't have a deep, rich culture, a history like Europe has or China has. So we have this natural beauty. And so it's all about the ecological integrity of this natural beauty that we try to preserve and protect for future generations. But on the other hand, it's usage of this this asset as well that's important. So we struggle with the balance of use and protection. I don't know the answer to it, but it shouldn't be the case of all use and no protection, just the way it shouldn't be all protection and no use. There needs to be a healthy balance, and we need to have proper metrics to make sure that we're doing something that is ultimately sustainable.
Thank you, Lon. Other two, if you want to add something, Doris and Patrizia?
Yeah, related to Mercedes' question, the interpretation, of course, is probably one of the most important aspects when you talk about culture and heritage tourism as a product, because at the end of the day, it's about the relevance of the product to the individual customer. So that is based on interpretation, and it is based on the codification of information, number one, representation of the information, number two, and then interpretation of information, number three. I agree with my panel friend that yes, travel agents or tour operators are trying to cut their costs and then compromise the interpretation aspect of the service. But again, in this case, I think it's based on the availability of information. So if you really do a good job in terms of codification and the representation of the information, I think that will really help to improve the experience of the customers or visitors. And then also in this process, ICT can also play a very important role. I believe that if you visit a lot of museums and sites, and then you have digital guide, and then it's very well designed, and then any site or any artifact you look at, and then you press the button, and then all the interpretation will come out to help you to interpret, to attach more kind of personal value or personal relevance to the subject or whatever you are enjoying, right? So relating to Peter's question, I think the government role is really to provide the platform, the policy, the guidelines, but I don't think that government should take control of everything, because as far as I know, nowhere in the world, that is the best model, or that model is working very well. So, my belief for the government is really to provide the platform policy regulations to encourage the private sectors, to be involved in a process. So, in terms of relationship between usage and preservation, and we have a lot of countries, and just for the under the guidance of preservation, they don't allow usage of the site or building at all, and then sometimes they just leave the sites for destruction and decay. Okay, so if you do not do anything, and then of course after some time it will be gone, right? So I think I agree there should be a balance. Thank you.
Thank you. I am going to just ask Doris, do you want to say something just final? I can give you 2 minutes if you would like to add something.
Did you understand?
Would you like to say something? Add another comment?
I want to comment the public paper to maintain the heritage. But we have examples to see where the public work it and maintain, and better than the public is the private. The private, they have very different uses for the heritage, and like this, of course, not so beautiful, not so big, and not so old, but very good places, and the private maintenance or the private entrepreneurship is very important, and it works very well.
Thank you.
Better than the public.
Thanks.
I agree with Mercedes. I think we need a new codex to talk to new public, to talk to new visitors, to talk to different cultures than others. Because as you said, we, Europe and US are quite similar, so South of America. But Asia, they are different culture. They come from different culture. Once we had beautiful exhibitions in Beijing. The first time we had an exhibition in Beijing on Renaissance, and we took there the most important hors d'oeuvre from Uffizi. And we have, of course, this kind of artworks. Christ, religious, because it becomes from our culture. And it has been a terrible not success, because it was a different manner to watch things that we are used to watch, but they were not used to watch. So we learned that we have to find similar codex to introduce them to our culture, and for us also to have new codex to understand their culture. Because when I went to the Beijing Museum and I saw 20 rooms of calligraphy, for me it was totally, really boring, because I couldn't understand anything. You know, the first was interesting, the second less, and the third I was already drunk. Because I didn't have the instruments to understand what I was watching. So I think it's important to have mediation, cultural mediation, intermediation. Thanks.
All right. We're struggling with this speaker, because if they turn it to that side, we cannot hear, and
Really,
if you turn it away from us, we cannot hear. That's all
The
right.
conclusion are up to the floor.
Thank you, Professor Antonioli and panelists. Let's give them a hand of applause.